Next speaker is an anti-racist and community activist turned Member of Parliament. She represents the Leicester East constituency and she's a member of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs. She's been a fantastic supporter of Stop the War over the years, so it's a real pleasure to be joined by Claudia Webbe.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's my name is Claudia Webbe. I'm the Member of Parliament for Leicester East. And it's a pleasure to join you all today and to speak alongside such an inspiring panel. And I would just like to start by really thanking Stop the War, not only for organising today's fantastic event, but also for all the work they do in service of peace and global justice. 10 years ago, in March 2011, only 2% of the House of Commons voted against intervention in Libya, just 13 MPs. This tiny minority, which included Jeremy Corbyn, of course, have been gravely vindicated over the last 10 years. This war has led to more misery, tragedy, and heartbreak for the Libyan people. The war is commonly understood as a disaster, and it shows the importance of speaking up against war and for peace, internationalism and justice, even when the establishment and their media try to squeeze out our voices. We also know from WikiLeaks cables that the motive for invading Libya was not the hollow humanitarian rhetoric heard in the House of Commons, but rather the neo-colonial desire to install a regime that better served the strategic interest of Western countries, as well as the extraction of oil and gas from North Africa. The Libyan bombing campaign demonstrated that the British establishment had learned nothing from the illegal invasion of Iraq, especially that Western intervention and regime change only serve to create power vacuums that exacerbate the suffering of people in the surrounding regions. The racism and Islamophobia of these military interventions cannot be ignored. Neither can the enduring legacy of the British Empire, which carved up the region and left a legacy of instability that persists to this day. The Iraq, Afghanistan and Libyan interventions must be seen in this historical context, in which Britain still believes it can act with impunity in a region from which they have violently extracted an obscene amount of resources over the centuries. You know, I was elected on a manifesto which pledged to end the bomb first, talk later approach. And this approach to international security was what I committed to. Limit the war powers of the executive and conduct an audit of the impact of Britain's colonial legacy so that we can fully expose the British contribution to the violence and insecurity across regions previously under British colonial rule. You see, this last policy is incredibly important, as this year we have seen an appalling resurgence of the demonization of refugees and asylum seekers. Yet asylum seekers arriving in Britain are often from countries where the UK has contributed to their disruption, either by arming current conflicts or through the enduring legacy of colonialism. The time has come for former empires to take seriously the historical debt that they owe to the countries, communities and individuals who endured their cruelty. As internationalists, it is therefore crucial that we defend the anti-war policy programme developed over the last 5 years. And for many of us, we'd hoped that the unprecedented pandemic would provide a unique opportunity for peace. Yet, there are currently thousands of British forces in at least 35 countries around the world, including 1,000 in Afghanistan and more than 1,000 in the Middle East. Their continued presence in these areas is only serving to prolong conflict and heighten tensions. For instance, in Yemen, as we've heard, the conflict has spiked during the pandemic. The UK, alongside the US, supplies weapons and, crucially, military support to the Saudi-led coalition, which is responsible for the highest number of reported civilian fatalities. The death toll in the war in Yemen passed 100,000 just last year. The Yemeni conflict is one of the worst humanitarian crises of the modern era. It is shameful that Britain remains complicit in such an atrocity, especially as the US has signalled that US support for Saudi-led coalition will end. But of course, we cannot have hope in a regime change, if you like, in the US, because we've already seen US airstrike in Syria, a firm commitment to uphold illegal sanctions on Venezuela aimed at regime change. And this is within just a few months of Joe Biden coming to office. Issues of Islamophobia and racism, again, must be recognised in the Yemeni conflict. It is unimaginable that suffering on the scale seen in Yemen would be permitted by the international community to take place in a majority white country. The coronavirus outbreaks offered our government, the British government, a unique opportunity to step away from the conflict, as well as other theatres of war, which caused so much suffering across the globe, yet our government refused to take it. Although the UK backed the UN's global ceasefire proposal, there is no evidence of any action being taken on the ground, with the RAF continuing to fly troops around the world. From this pandemic to the existential threat of climate change, the global community is facing increasingly common enemies that cannot be solved by warmongering and belligerence. The government must be true to its word and draw up a plan to withdraw troops from war zones, as well as reconsider its recent hike in the military budget. And this brings me to some final conclusions. That in this time of a global pandemic, it is time that we come together to loudly say, time has come for our government to stop spending so much money on weapons of war and destruction, including nuclear weapons, and instead spend it on keeping us secure by tackling the pandemic, climate change, and the other crises we face. From this pandemic to the existential threat of climate change, the global community is facing those increasingly common enemies. All of us on the left must therefore use our voice, of course, to ensure that we are a force for peace and justice across the globe. And you know, I'm incredibly proud to represent an incredibly diverse area, community, constituency of Leicester East, where we have a significant number of residents who are Muslim, and I'm fortunate to experience the firsthand the many important ways in which the Islamic community contributes to our collective religious, cultural and political life. But we're in a time when the actions abroad have caused a huge increase in hate crime. It's more than doubled since 2013, as records signify. And it's never been therefore more important for our communities to come together and unite. We must oppose Islamophobia, racism, and any attempt to divide us up based on nationality or religion, whether at home or abroad. A better world is absolutely possible. And I believe that the sterling work of Stop the War, its endurance over the past 20 years, its historic ability to unite and bring us all together, will enable us all to ensure that not only is a better world possible, that we collectively together can make it happen. Solidarity, my friends, solidarity.